I still remember the taste of the roast chicken turning to ash in my mouth, the night my own daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and called me a freeloader. It was at Sunday dinner, the one ritual that kept our fractured family pretending to be whole. Everyone was there, my son, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law sitting smugly at the head of the table as though she owned it all. And maybe she thought she did. I had lived in that house for years, paid for its bricks with the calluses on my hands, paid the mortgage while my son was still in college, paid for the very dining room chair she now looked down on me from. And yet, in one cruel moment, she stripped me of dignity with that single word. Her voice dripped with disdain. Some people just eat and sleep here without contributing anything. Sounds like freeloading to me, don't you think? The room fell silent. My son's eyes darted away, refusing to meet mine. My grandchildren stopped chewing, sensing tension, but not understanding the cruelty of it. I felt my throat tighten, but I swallowed hard. I did not shout. I did not break. Because revenge doesn't always come in screams. Sometimes it brews in silence. And as I lowered my gaze to my untouched plate, I promised myself, one day she would choke on her own words. I was never a man of riches, but I was a man of grit. My hands have known the weight of bricks, the sting of rope burns, the ache of hammer swings. Every scar on these hands has a story of sacrifice, a story of how I built a life out of nothing but willpower. When my wife passed away far too young, I stood at her grave with our little boy clutching my hand, and I promised him and her that he would never go without. That was the moment my life stopped belonging to me. It belonged to him. In the mornings, I'd rise before the sun, sometimes with nothing more than black coffee in my stomach, and head to the construction site where the air was thick with dust and sweat. I'd push wheelbarrows until my legs shook, mix cement until my arms felt like lead, and climb ladders with splinters digging into my palms. But every dollar I earned wasn't just money. It was security for my boy. I remember nights when he'd be asleep on the couch, his textbook sprawled across his chest, and I'd tuck him in quietly, praying he never noticed how thin my shoes were or how many meals I skipped so he could have seconds. He used to say, "Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a big house so you don't have to work anymore." And I'd smile, knowing deep down that the only house we'd ever have was the one I was already building with my own 2 hands. There were winters where the cold crept into the walls, and I'd tell him to take the extra blanket while I sat by the old heater, pretending I wasn't shivering. Summers, when the air was heavy and suffocating, I'd let him have the last glass of cold water, telling him I wasn't thirsty, even though my throat burned. These weren't sacrifices to me. They were just what fathers do. When he turned 16, I surprised him with a used bicycle. It took me months of saving, hiding a few crumpled bills at a time, but the look on his face when he saw it, like the world had just been handed to him, made every sleepless night worth it. He didn't know that I had sold my own watch, the one gift my father had left me, to make it happen. I worked through injuries, too. Once, a beam collapsed on site, and I cracked 2 ribs. The doctor said to rest, but I wrapped myself up and went back the next day, because rent didn't care about broken bones. My son needed school supplies, and the idea of him showing up unprepared, embarrassed, was worse than any pain I felt. Even after all that, I never kept score. I never once thought of what I gave as something I should get back. Seeing him smile, watching him graduate, hearing him call me his hero, that was enough. But there was a price to such devotion. Loneliness. Nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done enough, if I'd raised him right without a mother's hand to guide us. Sometimes I'd whisper to the empty air, hoping my late wife could hear me. "I'm trying. I hope you're proud." Still, I found joy in the little things. A simple meal at the table with my son, laughter echoing through the living room when we watched reruns of old sitcoms, the quiet moments when he'd rest his head on my shoulder, too old for it, but still needing that comfort. Those small joys fueled me, made the hardships feel like stepping stones instead of boulders. And when he married, I felt relief. I thought maybe I could finally rest, finally live in the home I had built, surrounded by family, with grandchildren's laughter filling the rooms. I handed him the keys, told him this house was his now. I kept only a small room in the back, thinking that was all I needed, a corner to grow old in, a place where memories of my wife and the life I had built could stay with me. I thought love and respect would carry me through my final years. I thought my sacrifices meant something. But I was wrong. It didn't happen in one blow. It was a slow gnawing at the edges of my dignity, until there was almost nothing left. At first, it was the whispers, Clara's voice carrying from the kitchen when she thought I was out of earshot. "Your dad is always here," she'd hiss, like a shadow that never leaves. I pretended not to hear, because pretending was easier than bleeding in front of them. Then it was the thermostat, the way she'd slap my hand with her words whenever I nudged it a degree warmer. "Energy isn't free, you know," she'd say, not looking at me, her eyes on her phone. I'd nod and tuck my cold hands into my sleeves like a child being scolded. She reorganized the fridge and labeled shelves. "Clara Kids, meal prep, do not touch." I stood there, reading my place, nowhere. Once, I reached for a leftover container, and she snapped the lid out of my hand. "Ask next time, please. We plan our portions." Shock came first, soft, quiet, like a hand squeezing my heart. Then sadness, heavy, wordless, settling into my bones where warmth used to live. One afternoon I came home from a short walk, and my recliner was gone. "My chair?" I asked, already knowing. "It didn't match the aesthetic," she said, laughing. "We donated it." I swallowed so hard it hurt. "That was mine. Everything here is ours now," she smiled, and the word ours shoved me outside. The circle. My toolbox disappeared next. "Did you see my wrench set?" "Oh, that old junk? We cleared the clutter," she said, already walking away. I found my tools in a charity bin by the curb, and I stood there like a man fishing his past out of a stranger's hands. She made a chore list once and pinned it to the fridge, only my name had tasks. Wipe baseboards, sweep patio, clean gutters. I did them, because I'd rather sweat than fight. My son watched and said nothing, his silence like a second winter in the house. At dinner, Clara talked about their mortgage, her voice sweet as syrup. I stared at the dining room walls I'd painted, the crown molding I'd saved months to buy, and tried to swallow the taste of plaster in my mouth. One evening, she slid a stack of papers toward me. "Just a refinance," she said casually. "Sign here and here." I picked up the pen, then paused at the fine print. "What's this clause?" I asked. "Don't make it complicated," she sighed. "It's for the family." "For the family," I repeated, hearing the door of my small room slam shut in those words. "I need time," I said, pushing the papers back. She clucked her tongue. "He's being difficult, Mark," she told my son. He rubbed his temples. "Dad, can we not do this tonight?" Not do this, like dignity could be rescheduled. The first time she called me a guest, it was small, almost playful. "Mark, tell your guest we're watching a movie as a family tonight." I was on the couch, remote in hand, and the word cut me in half. I stood up without a fight and watched the movie alone through the thin wall of my room. One morning, I found my framed wedding photo tucked in a drawer. "Clara said we need a modern look," my son mumbled, avoiding my eyes. I felt my wife's memory fold under a stranger's taste. At the grocery store, Clara held out the receipt. "Groceries are tight," she said. "Since you ate the yogurt, can you transfer me 40? I handed her cash I needed for my prescriptions and thanked her for letting me exist. My granddaughter repeated something she overheard. "Mom says Grandpa doesn't pay rent." I laughed softly and told her I paid with stories and repairs and love, but the words felt childish on my tongue. I started timing my meals to avoid them, eating cold soup at odd hours like a trespasser in my own kitchen. They hosted friends, and I stayed in my room, listening to laughter splash against the door like waves I wasn't allowed to touch. My son came in once, sat on my bed edge, stared at the floor. "Clara's stressed," he whispered. "Just help me keep the peace." "I have been keeping the peace my whole life," I said, and he flinched like I'd shouted. The Sunday before it happened, she set the table with 6 plates and no chair for me. "Is there a seat?" I asked, standing there like a stranger. "Oh, we're tight on space," she replied, already pouring drinks. I ate standing up by the counter, chewing silence. The next week, the trap was baited with roast chicken and wine. Clara swirled her glass and smiled at me the way a cat smiles at a cornered mouse. "Some people just eat and sleep here without contributing anything," she said lightly. My fork hovered, shock fizzed in my ears. "Clara," my son muttered, "drop it." "I'm just being honest," she continued, eyes on me. "It feels like freeloading." The word landed like a slap. Sadness surged next, salt behind my eyes, the taste of old losses flooding back. Disbelief followed. How could they forget who paid the first brick, who kept lights on, who held this house together with work and prayer? I searched my son's face for a bridge and found only a wall. "Say something," I whispered, but the plea died in the din of clinking cutlery. Clara leaned back, satisfied. "We all pull our weight here," she said, "or we should." My grandchildren went still, sensing a storm but not knowing where to run. I set my fork down carefully, afraid it would shake if I held it. "My whole life," I said softly, "I have pulled more than my weight." She shrugged. "Well, times change." Disbelief hardened into something heavier, something with heat and teeth. I remembered winters without gloves, summers without fans, birthdays skipped and boots with holes. I remembered selling my father's watch to buy a bicycle with a bow on it. I remembered tucking my son in with hands too tired to hold anything but hope. And there, at that table I had paid for, surrounded by the walls I had raised, anger finally took a seat. It was not a fire that burned wild. It was a coal that glowed steady and patient. Clara smirked, mistaking my silence for surrender. My son looked away, mistaking his quiet for peace. I folded my napkin, laid it beside my plate, and felt the last thread of disbelief snap. They had abandoned memory for convenience. They had traded gratitude for greed. They had replaced respect with humiliation and called it honesty. I stood up slowly, nodded at my grandchildren, and swallowed the last of my sadness. When I sat back down, I was no longer begging to be seen. I was memorizing every word, every look, every cut that brought me here. And under the linen and the laughter, my anger cooled into resolve. They thought the betrayal ended at that table, but it was only the beginning of what came next. That night, after the dinner that broke something inside me, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed in my small room, staring at the faded photograph of my late wife. The walls around me, though built with my own hands, suddenly felt foreign, like I was a guess's, hid in a house that no longer remembered me. Her words, "Freeloader," still rang in my ears, louder than the laughter that followed, louder than the silence of my son, who chose not to defend me. I replayed the moment again and again, asking myself if I had imagined it, if perhaps she was only joking, if maybe I was too sensitive. But no, the smirk on her lips was real, the dagger in her voice intentional. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, missed meals, long hours, cold nights, and how it all seemed to vanish into thin air in that single cruel word. I clenched my hands together, feeling the rough ridges of my palms, reminders of decades of labor. These hands built this home, I whispered to myself. These hands carried my son through every storm. These hands buried my wife. These hands kept food on the table when the world had nothing to offer. And yet, those same hands were now treated as if they had never held worth. Sadness pressed down on me first, heavy like an anchor. I thought of leaving, of packing up what little I had and walking away. Maybe I could rent a tiny room somewhere, fade quietly into the background of life. But then another voice inside me asked, Why should you? Why should you abandon what you built just because they've forgotten? I stared at the ceiling, listening to muffled laughter drifting from the other side of the house. It was Clara's laugh, the laugh of someone who believed she had already won. She thought I was too old, too tired, too weak to fight back. She thought I would swallow humiliation until the day I died. But the longer I sat there, the less grief I felt, and the more something else began to stir. A low, steady heat that spread through my chest. Not rage that blinds you in the moment, but anger that sharpens, that focuses, that whispers, enough is enough. I thought of my son, how he had once called me his hero, how he had clung to me as a boy and promised to always stand by me. And now? He looked away while his wife spit venom at me. That betrayal hurt worse than anything, but it also made something inside me sue. Nap. If even my own blood wouldn't protect me, then I would have to protect myself. I rose to my feet slowly, my knees cracking, my back aching. In the mirror across the room, I saw an old man, shoulders bent, hair graying. But behind the wrinkles, behind the tired eyes, there was still steel. There was still fight. I walked to the window, staring out at the yard I had once mowed every weekend, the fence I had painted, the flowers my wife had planted before she passed. Clara called me a freeloader, in the very place where every blade of grass had once been watered by my sweat. The injustice of it lit something in me that could no longer be put out. They think I am powerless, I told myself. They think my silence means defeat. But they don't know me. They don't know what silence can hide. I sat back on the bed, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. I remembered every winter coat I went without so my son could have one. Every double shift I worked so he could go on school trips. Every time I came home hungry and told him I had already eaten. They thought they could erase all that history with one cruel word. No, not this time. For too long I had let grief soften me, had let loneliness silence me, but now grief had burned itself out, leaving only determination behind. Clara wanted to humiliate me, to push me into the shadows, to make me disappear. She thought I was too broken to resist. But she was wrong. I took a deep breath, steady and sharp. My heart felt lighter, not because the pain had gone, but because it had finally transformed into something usable, something that gave me strength. I looked again at my wife's photo and whispered, "I promised you I'd always take care of him." I did. But now I have to take care of myself too. And I swear to you, she will regret every word she spoke tonight. I felt my jaw tighten, a vow settling deep into my bones. This was no longer about survival. This was about dignity, about justice, about reclaiming what was mine. And as I lay back that night staring into the darkness, I repeated the words over and over until they became a promise I could not break. Enough is enough. She thinks she's won, but soon she'll know what it means to call me a freeloader. She'll choke on it. I'll make sure of it. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the ceiling like it might answer me, and when it didn't, I answered myself. If I was going to do this, it would be quiet, measured, undeniable. I started with the past. Old papers in older boxes, hauled from the attic when everyone slept. The deed. The clause I left there years ago, the lifeline nobody bothered to notice. I ran my finger over my name like touching a railing on a dark staircase. At dawn, I made coffee and pretended to be tired. I smiled when Clara asked me to rinse dishes. I wiped countertops I once bought. I gave them ordinary. I gave them routine. And underneath it, I built a war. The first stop was Harold, the lawyer who shook my hand at my wife's funeral and said, "If you ever need me, Hila." Looked older, but his mind was a locked cabinet. We sit. We open files. He reads the deed twice, then once more for the satisfaction of being right. "You left yourself a life estate," he said. Smart man. The words felt like armor sliding back onto my shoulders. We made a list. Title search. Certified copies. A formal notice drafted, not delivered, yet. A schedule, contingency, a calm timeline with sharp edges. Next, the bank. Mrs. Patel remembered me. She brought out records like treasures, canceled checks, mortgage statements, the years I paid long after anyone remembered it. "Do you want copies?" she asked. "I want a folder," I said. "Something that looks heavy." She gave me two. I filled both. I rented a P.O. box. Small key, big relief. I changed my mailing address quietly. Utilities, tax notices, insurance. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, their mail would learn the truth first. Then I went to the recorder's office. The clerk stamped the certified deed so hard the counter shook. I liked that sound. It sounded like a gavel. I kept a notebook, dates, words, the little humiliations they thought would vanish in the air. Not to cry over them, to confirm a pattern, to give my rage a ledger and my patience a plan. I spoke with Mr. Alvarez next door, the man who helped me raise the fence after a storm years ago. He shook my hand and said, "Whatever you need." "Just remember," I told him, "who built this place." He remembered. He'd sign an affidavit if needed. So would the old foreman from my crew. So would the neighbor across the street who'd seen me shoveling snow when my son was sleeping in a... I called Teresa at the library. She notarizes papers for the city on Thursdays. She notarized mine on a Tuesday, quietly for an old friend. No questions, only stamps. I met with Nina, a realtor who owes me a favor. I didn't say I was selling. I wasn't. I asked her about occupancy laws, notice periods, the shape of things when people forget who owns them. She gave me numbers, names, the clean lines of a lawful eviction, if it ever came to that. I didn't smile, but my spine did. I bought a small fireproof safe. I slid the deed inside, the certified copies. The notice is already signed, but undated. 3 envelopes labeled A, B, and CA for proof. B for notice. C for something they didn't have the imagination to fear yet. I wrote a letter to my son. Not for pleading. Those days were gone. For clarity. Dates. Sacrifices. The story of a house built from a life. A map back to the truth if he ever got lost enough to want to find it. I sealed it. Labeled it, "Open when you remember." I phoned Deacon Roy from church. He runs a moving truck on weekends. "Can you be on standby?" I asked. He didn't ask why. "Say the word," he said. I bought a new set of locks. Not to install. To set on the dresser beside my wife's photograph, a quiet promise I didn't have to speak. All week, I played the role of the man they thought I was. I took out the trash. I fixed the leaky faucet. I let Clara correct the way I folded towels. I nodded. I smiled. I disappeared on cue. And every night, I returned to my room and placed one more brick on the wall I was building around their arrogance. On Thursday, I visited the tax office. I paid the upcoming bill in full. Receipt stamped. Owner, my name. They could argue about everything, but not that. On Friday, I met Harold again. We rehearsed the moment like a scene in a play. What I would say, what I would not say, where I would place the papers, where he would be waiting, a phone call away, if they tried to turn drama into disaster. On Saturday, I sat with my grandchildren on the porch and taught them how to whistle with a blade of grass. They laughed. They didn't know Sunday was coming like thunder. I kept my smile soft and my hands steady. I inspected the house like an appraiser of memories. The molding, the piano bench, the garden hose rolled like a sleeping snake. I wasn't saying goodbye. I was counting what I would protect. In my notebook, I wrote the plan in small letters, each line a step, each step a rung. Stay quiet. Gather proof. Build allies. Control the mail. Confirm ownership. Prepare notice. Choose the moment. Do not flinch. I circled the last one twice. I underlined, choose the moment. Because this was never going to be a hallway confrontation or a muttered argument in the kitchen. It had to be a stage. It had to be a table. The same place she crowned herself queen. the same place she called me a freeloader. So I set the table in my mind. Sunday dinner. Their glasses. Their laughter. My envelope. A place gently between the salt and the truth. Envelope B tucked under my palm like a trigger. Envelope C waiting in the safe, a final turn if they forced my hand. What was in C? A trust, newly formed, with my name as trustee and guardian of these walls. A clear instruction. No sale, no refinance, no signature, but mine. A future they could not touch, even if they tried to rewrite the past again. I practiced my breath. In through the nose, out through the spine. I practiced my lines. Short, clean, irrefutable. I told no one what was coming. Not the neighbors, not the deacon, not even the photograph on my dresser. Plans leak when they're spoken. Mine would arrive like weather, felt before it's understood. On Sunday morning, I ironed my shirt, old but crisp. I polished my shoes until I could see the man I used to be in their reflection. I slipped the envelopes into my jacket. I touched the safe one last time, like a heartbeat behind a door. When I stepped into the hallway, I heard Clara laughing in the kitchen. I heard my son setting plates. I heard the home I built forgetting itself in real time. Let them laugh. Let them think this will be like last week and the week before. Let them think the old man will clear plates and swallow dust. I took my seat at the table. I waited for the right sentence to fall from her mouth like a cue. And when it did, I would lift my hand, place the paper, and open a door they didn't know existed. Patience is the knife you don't see until you feel it. Mine was honed. My hand was steady. My allies were in place. My proof was iron. And my plan? Simple, legal, unforgiving. What was I really planning? Not noise, not scenes. A reckoning, a quiet correction of the record. A house remembering its owner. A family remembering its foundation. I sat. I listened. I waited. And when the moment came, I would end the pretending with paper, not shouting, and begin the revenge I had been building, brick by careful brick. The night finally came. The very same Sunday dinner where weeks ago I had been humiliated, where my daughter-in-law's voice had cut me down like a knife in front of the people I loved most. And as I walked into that dining room with my head held high, I knew every detail of my plan was about to fall into place, because this time I wasn't coming as a silent, broken old man. I was coming as the storm they never expected. The table was full, the food steaming, the air buzzing with small talk, and yet I could feel the weight of my presence. My son gave me a wary glance. My daughter-in-law smirked like she still believed she held all the power, and I thought to myself, let her laugh while she can, because her smile is about to shatter. I waited, patient, letting the evening unfold as if nothing unusual was about to happen, sipping my water while my heart pounded with both dread and exhilaration. Finally, she opened her mouth, the same way she always did, throwing little barbs wrapped in jokes. "Oh, father-in-law, I hope you don't mind eating our food again," she said with that venom-laced grin, and the room laughed awkwardly. But before the shame could burn me like it once had, I leaned back and smiled, a smile so calm it unsettled her. "Actually," I said slowly, my voice steady, "this may be the last meal I'll be eating here, as your so-called freeloader." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing. But before she could interrupt, I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick folded document. My son froze, the chatter at the table silenced, forks paused mid-air. I laid the papers on the table, my voice sharp now. "Do you know what this is? This house, the land it stands on, and the investments that pay for the mortgage? They're all in my name. Every brick, every tile, every dollar that sustains this roof. It comes from me. Not you, not my son, and certainly not you, young lady." Her face drained of color, and my son shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing between us as though suddenly realizing he had been living in a home built on my sacrifice. She tried to laugh it off, her voice quivering. You're just bluffing. You wouldn't—" But before she could finish, I slid the keys across the table with a cold finality. "These are the keys to your life of comfort, and I am done letting you mock me while living off what I bled to build." The silence was deafening. My son stammered, "Dad, what are you saying?" And I turned to him, eyes burning with equal parts hurt and determination. "I'm saying that from this day forward, I will no longer fund a household that disrespects me. The accounts you've grown used to drawing from? Closed. The trust that secured your business loan? Revoked. The deed to this house? Transferred? But not to you." Their heads snapped up in unison, confusion and panic spreading across their faces. And that was the moment I revealed the twist I had hidden in plain sight. "You see," I continued, my voice steady, as I pulled out another folder, "last month I rewrote my will and reassigned my assets. To charities, to foundations, to people who actually need support. This home? It's being donated as a shelter for struggling families. People who know the value of respect, gratitude, and hard work. By next month, you'll be asked to leave." Her face twisted in disbelief, her voice rising. "You can't do that. This is our home, our life." And I leaned forward, letting every ounce of my long-buried fury lace my word. "Miss, you called me a freeloader while sitting in the very house I built, eating food bought with my sweat. No more. You'll know what it feels like to stand on your own, to live without leeching off someone else's sacrifice." My son buried his face in his hands, whispering, "God, what have we done?" And for the first time, I saw him not as the boy I raised, but as a man who had allowed his wife's arrogance to poison his soul. But my revenge wasn't finished yet. I stood, pulling out a small envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. "Inside," I said, "is every cruel word you've said to me, written down by your own hand." She blinked in confusion, then opened it, only to find photocopies of texts she had sent to her friends. Texts I had discovered through a mutual contact, mocking me, calling me useless, saying she was counting the days until I finally dropped dead. Gasps rippled through the family as they read the vile words aloud, and her face turned crimson with shame. How did you—" she stuttered, and I simply answered, "You were careless, and I was patient." The entire family stared at her in disgust, and for once she had no witty retort, no venomous smirk to hide behind. My voice thundered as I delivered the final blow. "You wanted the world to believe I was nothing but a burden. Well, now the world will know the truth, that you, living in a house you never earned, were the real freeloader." I turned to my son, my voice softening slightly. "I loved you more than life itself, but you chose silence when she insulted me, and that silence broke something between us. I will no longer carry you. It's time you learned the lessons I once taught you, that nothing in life comes free, and respect must be earned." I left the table then, my chest heaving with both pain and satisfaction, hearing behind me the eruption of chaos, her screaming, my son pleading, the rest of the family whispering in stunned disbelief. But I didn't turn back. I walked out of that house for the last time, knowing that by stripping them of the comforts they never valued, I had given them the one gift they truly deserved, the chance to understand just how much I had sacrificed all along. And as I closed the door behind me, I whispered the words that had fueled me for weeks, words they would never forget. "The freeloader has left. Let's see how you survive without him." When the dust of my revenge finally settled, I sat in the quiet of my own living room, the same living room where I had once dreamed of growing old, surrounded by love, laughter, and respect. And for the first time in years, I felt the air was lighter on my chest, as if the invisible weight I had carried, of betrayal, humiliation, and the pain of being labeled a freeloader in a home I helped build, had finally slipped away, leaving behind not bitterness, but clarity. My son, who had once stood silent when his wife disrespected me, now stood humbled, his eyes lowered whenever we crossed paths, because he had finally seen the truth laid bare. The house they lived in, the very roof over their heads, the security they flaunted, had always been because of my labor, my sacrifice, and my choices, and when I reminded the world of that, they had no defense left. I didn't celebrate with shouts or grand gestures. Revenge rarely looks like fireworks. It looks like silence, like the power of knowing that those who thought they could crush your dignity must now live every day aware of what they lost when they underestimated you. My daughter-in-law, once so smug, couldn't even look me in the eye at the next family dinner. She sat there stiff, her fork clinking against her plate, her once loud, commanding voice now reduced to a whisper, because she knew I had the power to pull the rug out from under her any time I chose. That fear was my justice, and yet, sitting there watching her eyes flicker nervously, I didn't feel hatred anymore. I felt something far heavier, a sadness, a mourning for the family I thought I had, for the son I raised with my own 2 hands, for the bond that should have been stronger than greed or pride, but was broken by silence, by cowardice, and by his choice to stand by while his wife humiliated me. I realized I hadn't just lost respect in that moment, I had lost trust, and trust once gone is nearly impossible to rebuild. But with that sadness came peace, too. Peace in knowing I had stood up for myself when it mattered, that I had not let their cruelty define me, that I had shown them and myself that I was not a burden, not a shadow, not a man to be pitied. I was the reason they had the life they lived, and by reminding them of that, I reclaimed my place, not in their household, but in my own heart. In the quiet that followed, I began to rebuild, not a home with them, but a life for myself. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected, neighbors who had always respected me, people who saw me not as what I could give, but as who I was. I started waking up with purpose again, cooking my own meals with care instead of eating leftovers with shame, walking in the park without the heaviness of feeling unwanted, and even writing in a journal each morning, reminding myself that every day I lived now was mine, not owed to anyone else. The greatest victory wasn't in their shame, it was in my freedom. Freedom from dependency, from the illusion that family always equals love, from the chain that bound me to people who didn't value me. I had learned, painfully, that blood may bind us, but respect keeps us together, and without it, you are just strangers sharing a table. And that became the moral etched into my soul. Never let anyone strip you of your worth, not even your own family. Sacrifice is noble, but it must never come at the cost of your dignity. Respect isn't a gift, it's the bare minimum, and if someone cannot give it, then you must find the strength to walk away, no matter how much it hurts. I wanted my story to echo beyond my walls, to remind anyone listening that silence in the face of humiliation only feeds the fire of disrespect. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not destroying others, but refusing to let them destroy you. So when I sat alone at my own table weeks later, eating a meal I had prepared, the steam rising from the plate, the smell of comfort filling the room, I smiled, not because I had made them fear me, but because I had finally remembered to love myself, and that was the truest revenge of all.